What the UFO? I'm Caleb, flying solo this week, so I'm going to try something different. I'm going to read an essay that I wrote. If you want to read this whole thing with your eyes, you can check it out at WTUFO.com. It's called We Should Be Humble and Curious About UFOs. It's probably like the sixth title I wrote for this thing. I don't know if you've had this experience writing about UFOs, but sometimes you have the tendency to go all over the place. And especially if you're trying to write something for public consumption, you find yourself quickly realizing you have to backtrack all the way to the beginning of the UFO journey to just explain why you think this stuff is real at all, when most people don't, or at least half people don't. I don't know. I still haven't seen great numbers on this. Maybe we're at like 40%, maybe we're over 50. Anyway, I'm going to lay out my pitch for why we need a new humility around UFOs and why we should expand our expectations from the standard phrase that everybody says, which is, I'm sure there's life somewhere in the universe, to more humbly expecting that we probably have been visited and are being visited right now. And the sort of argument that I'd love to get across here is that we're engaged in this consistent update to our arrogance, and that's the whole history of human scientific progress. And UFOs are obviously going to be another huge step in that direction of realizing that we're not super special. But it's really hard to make that step. And as a result, people, I think, are carrying around a set of assumptions that they don't notice that they're carrying about how likely UFOs would be to make themselves apparent and how easy they would be to see, among other things. So I'm going to read this essay. Hopefully, I hope that you enjoy. I've been told hopefully is a garbage word by my mom, and I agree with her. Also, E.B. White, I think, thought that. So, essay incoming. Listen if you'd like. Kick back with a pina colada or a blue-themed UFO drink, or just go read this on the internet if you prefer ingesting via your face, the front of your face. All right, I'm stalling. We should be humble and curious about UFOs. History has humbled humans. We're not the center of our star system. We descended from apes, and we live on one speck in a giant cosmos, the scale of which we may never truly measure. The pace of exoplanet discovery in the past 2 decades has forced us to face another humbling realization. Earth is likely just one of myriad worlds with complex life. That is how you use myriad correctly. I'm sure you appreciated it. On the scale of our global civilization, to the extent we have one, we've gradually absorbed all this with as much dignity as we can muster. Now, increasingly reliable information about UFOs invites us to consider a series of even more humbling ideas. Anthropocentric trigger warning. These possibilities are genuinely difficult to accept if you haven't accepted them already. As you engage with research in this area, however, you will find they are likewise hard to avoid. So if you're already on board with the UFO stuff, these won't seem particularly surprising to you. But if you're just getting your feet wet, they might still be kind of sending you for a spin. They are: 1, aliens probably visit Earth. 2, their technology is better than ours. 3, they intentionally avoid our detection. 4, our militaries know and keep this secret. 5, we probably can't stop these visitors. So probably, I should put probablys in all of these. Their technology is probably better than ours. I mean, almost certainly. They intentionally avoid our detection. I mean, it seems like they must be doing that. Our militaries probably know and keep this secret. I think if you're paying attention, it's hard to avoid that conclusion. And 5, we probably can't stop these visitors. Unfortunately, as far as we know, that's mostly true right now. There may be hints that we can do some things, however. Anyway, depending on your temperament, these possibilities might inspire a range of emotions, from wonder to concern. For some, they're so collectively upsetting, they offer a compelling reason to ignore the topic altogether. I once asked a friend if I could talk to him about UFOs, and he said, "No thanks, I believe they're real, I just worry about enough things already." But avoiding these observations will not keep them from being true if they are, and it will stop us from answering interesting questions. If non-human beings are visiting Earth, where are they from? What do they use for energy? How fast can they travel? What can they teach us about life, the universe, and everything? Scientific exploration of UFOs holds the promise of almost unimaginable progress. But the people who should be most excited about this, scientists and journalists, academics and engineers, are strikingly collectively incurious. When they're pressed about why, they usually demonstrate a failure of humility along the lines I mentioned above. So I present these possibilities to encourage the naturally inquisitive to humble themselves, at least hypothetically, and thereby regain their curiosity for this fascinating subject. Okay, so 1. Aliens probably visit Earth. Consistent sightings of metallic disks, orbs, rods, cigars, and other shapes date back to humanity's earliest days of large-scale flight. Before World War II, the total number of planes on Earth may have numbered in the tens of thousands. By the end of the war, our militaries had produced some 800,000. So it should be no surprise that this era saw the beginning of UFO reports. Dozens of documented cases of Foo Fighters emerged from the war, particularly in 1944 and 1945, and many of these likely went unreported. Kenneth Arnold's famous Mount Rainier sighting followed in 1947. The private pilot reported seeing 9 objects flying at high speed in a V formation. More sightings of such formations came in the next few years, including by commercial pilots in July of 1952 and air traffic controllers and Air Force personnel in Washington, D.C. in the following weeks. These early sightings are especially compelling because they predate any conceivable high-tech program by humans. So the secret military craft explanation cannot account for events in the early days of human aviation. The first head of the CIA, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, who led the agency from its inception in 1947, September. He was actually the DCI as of May, but the CIA got formed in September, until October of 1950 when he stepped down. Hillenkotter said in 1960, "The unknown objects are operating under intelligent control. It is imperative that we learn where the UFOs, unidentified flying objects, come from and what their purpose is." Referring to the years of World War II and shortly after, he said, "I know that neither Russia nor this country had anything even approaching such high speeds and maneuvers." The upshot of this history is that some of these are almost certainly technological and almost certainly not human. They've been visiting Earth since at least the 1940s and possibly long before we had the ability to meet them in the sky. So far, so good, but who's flying these things? Is anyone there at all? Enter the contactees/experiencers. We have a long, shameful history of ridiculing these people. Like any group with sensational claims, a few likely invented stories for attention and money, but thousands more wanted nothing to do with fame, especially not the kind they got. And it's time to start treating this community with respect and curiosity. #believe contactees. So what can they tell us? People who've encountered UFOs with occupants describe beings with a wide range of appearances, from strikingly human to classically alien. Recurring themes in their descriptions suggest a handful of distinct visiting species, potentially with a variety of less frequent guests. Some folks report being told that the visitors came from the stars. A few received specific cosmic addresses. That sort of suggests that they actually were extraterrestrial, but leaving that aside, many experienced some kind of sexual encounter. Fortunately or not, some of these were pleasant, some were medical and extractive. These stories stretch from recent days into the distant past, although more recent, as in the last 100 years, stories tend to have more of the conventional alien races in them, as we've come to understand them in our modern history. Among his other research, famed ufologist Jacques Vallée has drawn lines between many such sightings and folklore reports that go back at least hundreds of years. And as anyone with a television knows, the Ancient Aliens team has logged 20 seasons of documentary investigations that hint at even older encounters. Some ufologists think these beings come from a hidden Earth civilization. Others think some are humans from the future or beings from higher spatial dimensions. I personally find the extraterrestrial hypothesis intuitively plausible, but the important points are that whatever people are seeing, whoever people are meeting, They're not garden variety humans, and these interactions are too detailed and widely reported to dismiss as endemic confusion. Since many sightings connect these occupants to their vehicles, we can reasonably expect that some fraction of aerial appearances are indeed space-manned craft. In the US, around 5,000 people report seeing a UFO every year. If the rest of the world sees them at similar rates, that could mean 125,000 annual global sightings. Most of these may be prosaic objects, but some stubborn percentage, typically between 5 and 20%, have resisted explanation by every group of experts that has considered them since we first noticed their presence. In fact, the better the evidence going into an analysis, the higher the unidentified rate tends to be on the other side. Caps out at around like 33%. The evidence suggests that someone is here and they have highly capable vehicles. So part 2, their technology is better than ours. Since our first encounters in the 40s, UFOs have appeared to move far faster than our most advanced machines. Pilots have measured their positions relative to landmarks and estimated speeds ranging into the tens of thousands of miles per hour. Many of these objects have performed sudden changes in direction that would kill human pilots. Many have submerged and reemerged from bodies of water. Some have been tracked to altitudes where humans can't follow, including the edge of space, as Commander David Fravor told Congress in 2023. He said 80,000 feet and called that the edge of space. Air Force F-18 pilot, Navy F-18 pilot Ryan Graves told the New York Times that some of these objects resist wind better and remain aloft far longer than any of our known technology. And most exciting, some of these craft show no emissions, which suggests they have a source of energy far superior to our current combustion methods. Tantalizingly, if they're making the trip to Earth from other stars, these visitors may have answers for us about one of our biggest questions. Can anything exceed the speed of light? Which, by the way, would imply that some versions of time travel are possible, as far as we know, like relative to our contemporary physics. So whatever they are and wherever they come from, they show us decisively that we have not approached the limits of physics where flight is concerned. If they're using anti-gravity fields, as many suspect, our days of burning dirty fossil fuels to move through the skies may happily be numbered. All this should be intensely invigorating to the technologists who dream of building a better world. But Silicon Valley has been notably silent about these potential revolutionary findings. They should get in the game. Where's the Cuban or Thiel founded Sky Sensor startup, or the X Prize for UFO detection, or the OpenAI hotspot predictor? At the very least, someone should build a blockchain camera app that can provide provenance records for unaltered video. That could help solve another long-standing riddle. Why are these things so hard to photograph? I should briefly say that Enigma Labs is a product of Silicon Valley, and so they deserve props for being like the one sort of tech world engine that's doing anything about UFOs. And if you haven't, you should definitely check them out. I think they only have an iPhone app, but they're definitely worth looking at. I think you can engage with their stuff via browser. So part 3, these things are intentionally avoiding our detection. I'm going to call this the cautious aliens hypothesis. After 80 years of documented sightings, it's become abundantly clear that UFOs are largely avoiding us. The closest we've come to a White House lawn moment was in 1952, when waves of UFOs flew over America's capital with apparent impunity. Air Force pilots detached to track them down couldn't keep up, let alone shoot them down. Air traffic controllers reported for the rest of their lives that they saw these things both on radar and out the windows of their office in the sky. Unfortunately, our visual recording abilities at the time were somewhat narrow, although the famous McMinnville photo dates to 1950 and has never been convincingly debunked. If you've never seen this photo, you should totally look at it. It's just kind of a gray sky with a very clear, dark, oval saucer shape outside the back of a farm above some power lines. You can check it out in the essay. And that's hilariously, that photo is taken like 1 or 2 months maybe before Enrico Fermi poses his famous paradox question. Where are they? Maybe they were in Oregon, and that was the answer. One imagines that a similar wave in DC today would be all over TikTok and the gram and whatever's cool now. Perhaps it's not a coincidence that we haven't had a mass sighting since before the advent of the smartphone. It's possible they're avoiding mass sightings now. It's possible. We've talked about that on this program before. So astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson made a kind of good point when he told TMZ in 2023 that if we had an alien invasion, more than the US government would know about it. We would know about it. We, with cameras and smartphones, we are crowdsourcing an invasion of Earth because everybody has a camera, a high-resolution camera. Smiley, Neil deGrasse. I don't know, I'd give it a 6. This is a reasonable point as far as it goes, but it ignores the oft-reported rapid motion of these objects, and it leaves a significant possibility unexamined that UFOs would intentionally evade our detection. In fact, cautious aliens may be the only hypothesis other than math's delusion that fits our observations. For at least 77 years, and probably far longer, humans have seen mysterious objects in the sky, and many have encountered strange beings of various kinds. Either hundreds of thousands of people have had eerily similar psychotic breaks, or intelligent visitors are observing us carefully. There are probably some other options in there, but it seems like it's almost certainly one of those things. Ask yourself, and this I think is most convincing, it's a thought experiment. Ask yourself, what will humans do when we gain the ability to visit other inhabited worlds? Will we fly down to a major population center, announce our existence, and explain our technology? Or will we conduct years of careful reconnaissance and cautious exploration? The answer is obvious. So it should seem accordingly likely that this is what our visitors are doing. They're checking us out. Maybe their activities are mostly military or scientific. Maybe some of them are tourists. Maybe, even more humbling, they play some kind of gardening role on Earth that we don't yet understand. Whatever they're doing, they're behaving like we would if we could visit their planets. And if we were thousands of years ahead of them technologically, you can bet we'd have methods of avoiding their alien iPhones. So I won't mention this explicitly, but I'm kind of pinging the idea of cloaking devices here. These things are very fast. They often do show up grainy in photos, and people have reported taking pictures that they thought would be clear and then looking at them later and finding nothing but blur. It's entirely possible that electromagnetic fields are having some effect that our current phone and camera technology can't account for when it's trying to take a picture. So they're trying to avoid us, and they're doing that by not appearing in major populated areas frequently, by moving very quickly, usually when they do, and maybe by deploying some countermeasure like a cloaking device that makes it hard to photograph. It's entirely possible that all three of those things are operational, and I think we have to assume that they're trying not to be seen because that's the only behavior that fits with the evidence we've accumulated for almost 100 years. Okay, diversion over part 4. Our militaries know and keep this secret. This is probably true. I don't really want it to be true, but it probably is. After the 1952 wave in Washington, D.C., Air Force Major General John Samford told reporters in the biggest press conference since World War II that the whole affair was nothing to worry about, just a temperature inversion that fooled the radar sensors. One guy on Wikipedia, cited as a debunker, actually suggests that maybe we just had some dumb air traffic controllers at what was now Reagan National Airport. I mean, that's like so offensive and insulting to people who are doing an incredibly hard job in like one of the most important places to be a good air traffic controller. Really, you think they were just idiots? I think that person is an idiot. That's my saucy fire. Oh my God, derailed again. But as Leslie Kane reports in her excellent book, UFOs, Generals, and Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record, it's a freaking awesome book. That same guy, that same Major General, Major General Samford, told the FBI a totally different story, that experts in the Air Force believed that these were solid craft and they could well be interplanetary. So at the same time that the Air Force was telling the public via its press conferences that this was just a temperature inversion, they were telling the FBI that they thought these might be alien craft. So they knew, and they weren't telling us, but they were talking about it internally. That should be a giant smoking gun for anybody who's trying to pay attention. Time jump light change. This is an example of a persistent pattern. As far back as the UFO phenomenon goes, the US military and intelligence agencies have guarded their knowledge of the subject with careful secrecy. In many cases, these agencies have stepped up to the line of deliberate deception. Some say they've crossed it and entered dangerous territory, waging disinformation campaigns against the citizens who employ them. Spooky stuff. The many books on this subject contain varying levels of academic rigor. For the detail inclined, I recommend the historian Richard Dolan's extensively researched UFOs and the National Security State. It comes in 2 volumes, 1941 through 1973 and 1973 through 1991. To those who do the reading, start with Kane and graduate to Dolan. It's pronounced Leslie Kane, even though it's spelled like it would be Keen. Start with Kane, graduate to Dolan. It will be evident that the American military and intelligence communities have repeatedly misled the public about internal agency interest and information. As Hillenkotter put it in a letter to Congress in 1960, quote, "Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense." That's especially maddening because that is still the situation in 2024. A lot of people still think this is totally silly, and the secrecy is basically causing that. One plausible explanation for this sustained subterfuge is that the security state has been trying to protect civilians from this uncomfortable truth. It's not hard to sympathize with that project. In the early days of our UFO experience, when the authorities of the time created these policies, society must have felt fragile in a way that's hard to imagine today. In the wake of World War II, the geopolitical world was unstable, and the military and intelligence communities were in flux. Millions of people have just died, of course. It was a very serious, world-shaking time. It happened to be the case that the Air Force, the CIA, the National Security Council, and the Department of Defense, which was originally called the National Military Establishment, were all created in 1947. Air Force, CIA, NSA, DOD, all of that gets created in 1947, which, as it happens, is the same year that something crashes in Roswell, New Mexico, setting off a national wave of ET speculation. 2 then recent events loomed large in the political and military imagination of the time: the successful secrecy of the Manhattan Project and the widespread panic sparked by Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. There's some dispute as to whether people really did freak out all that much about War of the Worlds, but at the time, within the brass, it was considered a reason to be careful. So it's easy to believe what many have alleged over the years, that a group of elite military and intelligence officials created a classification system of extreme secrecy to protect all internal study of UFOs. The public-facing efforts like Project Blue Book focused entirely on reassuring civilians that they shouldn't be concerned. Meanwhile, inside the agencies, security was even tighter than the nuclear program, partly to shield the public from potentially destabilizing discoveries, and partly, maybe even more, to keep Russian spies from stealing whatever information we had about apparently game-changing technology, which could have led to one or the other country dominating the world in the era after World War II. So over the years, this emergency response appears to have ossified into standard practice. It hardened into what we do all the time. If whistleblowers like David Grush are telling the truth, today, this regime of hyperclassification has foiled efforts by Congress to exercise meaningful oversight of this program for almost 80 years. That's an insane success rate, especially in government and military. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, you'll know this name if you're a UFO head, who served on President Eisenhower's National Security Council from 1953 to 57, and later led the Pentagon's, quote, foreign technology desk, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, described the process as he understood it in his pretty fun book, The Day After Roswell. Corso alleged that the existence and recovery of alien technology had been hidden for 50 years, protected by various serial incarnations of an ad hoc confederation of top secret working groups throughout different branches of the government. To his knowledge, that practice was still going on as of 1997. It's possible, of course, that Corso was mistaken about this program or about aspects of this program. And it's possible that David Grush was mistaken when he described just such a program to Congress in 2023, and that retired Army Carl Nell was mistaken when he substantiated Grush's claims, stating, quote, his assertion concerning the existence of a terrestrial arm race occurring sub rosa over the past 80 years, that means underground, over the past 80 years, focused on reverse engineering technologies of unknown origin is fundamentally correct, as is the indisputable realization that at least some of these technologies of unknown origin derive from non-human intelligence. That was Carl Nell backing up Dave Grush. And it's possible that attorney Daniel Sheehan and journalist Ross Coulthart, both of whom say or have strongly implied that they're in communication with people currently working on such a program, it's possible those guys are mistaken. Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, and the elected representatives in the House UAP caucus could be wrong about the Pentagon hiding information on the subject. Chuck Schumer and Mike Rounds could have been on a meritless fishing expedition when they included the phrase non-human 22 times in their UAP legislation. But all of these claims add up to a proverbial awful lot of smoke. So why are most news organizations content to cover what looks like a fire as if it were an accident of dust? Outside the ranks of elite media commentators, most people think the Pentagon's blanket denials merit significant skepticism. Mainstream journalists and commentators should update their narrative frames to incorporate this crowd wisdom. With few exceptions, news writers and anchors have reported on the Pentagon's UFO statements with embarrassing credulity. Their uncritical coverage should be especially mortifying since most of them are old enough to remember how many weapons of mass destruction we didn't find in Iraq. I share here a graph from Gallup with a poll that says about 70% of Americans think the US government knows more about UFOs than it's telling us. So 5, the most uncomfortable part, we probably can't stop these visitors. And side note, that fact is likely the main reason that the security state continues to push this secrecy. Because I don't think they're as worried about Russian spies now as they were in the 1950s. So at this point, they're basically not telling people because they don't want people to know that they're not the most powerful force in the universe or on Earth specifically. So some reports, including the accounts of Grush and Corso, suggest human military forces have learned how to bring down alien craft, maybe with EMPs or other directed energy weapons. And if so, that's at least a step toward equal footing with our uninvited guests. Though, as Ross Coulthart has pointed out, it's also inviting disaster by poking the bear. However, at least it gets us in the game militarily. But the speed and power differentials of our craft are still apparent. In 2023, Commander Fravor, who will also be familiar to UF heads, UF heads, described the Tic Tac UFO he encountered in 2004 as, quote, far superior to anything that we had at the time, have today, or are looking to develop in the next 10 plus years. And that was 20 years ago that he saw it. So we've had 20 years to get anywhere close to that, and he still thinks we're nowhere near it. So the brute fact is, they're more advanced than us. It will be decades or more before we can realistically formulate a robust military deterrent to their free passage through our skies and waters. If aliens are really here, they have technology that is way ahead of ours, and they're just unstoppable right now, probably on a mass scale, which is very difficult to think about. It's not fun, and it's hard for governments to tell us, obviously. So this leaves, since we can't stop them, investigation and negotiation. We need to learn as much as we can about these beings and their craft, and we need to establish some method of formal public communication. Our scientific communities should forge ahead with investigation, following Avi Loeb and Gary Nolan's leads. Our journalists should pressure our military and intelligence agencies to reveal more information so our civilian research institutions can engage with at least some of the materials that our armed forces have likely recovered. Our political and humanities communities should explore ideas and formulate protocols around communication. like in every alien movie where they find an expert in linguistics to come talk to them about how to send a message to the aliens. We should have a full court press within the humanities to imagine ways to communicate. But of course, we can't do that until people get over this hill of accepting that it's a real situation to begin with. We should tell our elected leaders to directly investigate the security state. That's another thing that we should do. Not order more dubious self-reporting from the Pentagon. Quote, "No gambling in my cafe," says Rick. That's how I think about the Arrow report. Oh, really? The Pentagon says it's not keeping any secrets? Well, I guess the Pentagon is probably right about the Pentagon. Obviously not trustworthy. The rest of us, meanwhile, in addition to doing that elected leader pressure, should record what we see on apps like Enigma and UFO sightings. We should give more credence to and sympathy to people who report encounter experiences. And as I mentioned before, we should pressure our elected officials. I did that backwards, sorry. Globally, also, obviously, the United Nations should be developing a plan for positive engagement. And in America, the State Department should be taking the lead on establishing some kind of protocols for direct public political outreach. But most of all, what we should all do is care. This is a massive moment for humanity. However long our species lives, official public contact with non-human intelligence will always mark an epochal turning point. I looked that up, but it is a real word. So the change between epochs in our understanding of the cosmos and our place therein. Everyone on Earth today is living on the cusp of that change. Many of us will get to see it happen. We should cherish this chance to move history on the grandest possible scale. So, outro, conclusion, humility should make us curious. Many scientists and journalists are caught in a UFO catch-22. They express disinterest in researching the subject because they think we have insufficient evidence to take it seriously, yet they are the very people who can gather the kinds of evidence that will convince people like them. The US military and intelligence communities have clearly decided to keep what they know secret. If we wait for them to tell us what's happening, we'll be choosing to live in ignorance about one of the most exciting events in human history. We have plenty of evidence to build on, despite the instincts of many journalists and scientists. Brave researchers have organized this information over decades, during which most of us considered this topic a joke. It is now on us to change the quality of our laughter from snarky, hubristic chortle to a surprised, humble chuckle. I got a little caught up in my purple passage there. I should have murdered my own darling. But we've been laughing about this for a long time, and we should change that laughter from arrogant pride to humble surprise. Richard Feynman famously said that if you're not confused by quantum mechanics, you don't understand it. I think we can apply a similar test here. If you're not curious about UFOs, you're not paying attention. Because at this point in the development of ufology, people who think UFOs are all human tech or weather phenomena or mass delusion are just not engaging with the field of study. I could say I'm unconvinced about germ theory because I've never seen a bacterium or read a microbiology book, but that wouldn't make me a reasonable agnostic. It would just make me ignorant. If you're still uninformed about this topic, which why would you be if you've made it all the way through this? Or if you know someone who is, which might be more likely because we all know lots of those people, then pick up Leslie Kean or Richard Dolan's books. Leslie Kean's book specifically is a great one to give to total beginners. It's a book I've gifted, I think, 3 times now to people who are, curious enough and ready to read something that's really dry and really carefully researched. No unhinged conspiracy theories. Richard Dolan is more serious. It gets a little more conspiratorial, but there's a lot more detail because he wrote these 2 massive, sprawling, very detailed history books, essentially, about both UFO sightings and the national security state's response to them. Watch Fravor and Graves and Grush testify to Congress if you haven't done that, which of course you have, but at least get your friends to watch their opening statements. Read Chuck Schumer's proposed UAP legislation, or just skim it and look for non-human. Just search for non-human and marvel at the fact that it's in there 22 times. And ask yourself or ask your friends, why would Chuck Schumer and Mike Rounds write this bill? Why would they do that? And why would anyone block its key provisions unless they were protecting a secret? Like, there would be no reason to block a UFO review board unless you thought there was something that that review board could find, right? Guess you could maybe argue that it would be like government waste to hire those people, but that's pretty darn thin coming from as a response to legislation that's coming from the leader of the Senate. Anyway, if you want to go deeper, you can read J. Allen Hynek or Edward Ruppelt. You can read Keogh. You can read Pasulka, Coulthart, Corso, DeLong. Read Passport to Magonia. It's so much fun. Read Abduction, the John Mack mountain of a book, which is not fun at all, but pretty interesting. Read Communion. Communion is a little more fun, a little more approachable, because it's one experiencer's point of view. Read the Condon Report, even the sort of barbarically messed up government attempt to have a scientist weigh in, or at least, scroll through the PDF, because it's all online and it's like 200 pages and it's pretty interesting. And the report itself has way more detail than the summary would lead you to believe. And finally, just engage with the subject and let it move you. I know you're already doing this, so I guess that's kind of not for you, but help other people do that. Because how could this not move us? The bottom line is that UFOs are probably real. So wherever they're from and whatever they're here for, they're likely technological craft controlled by non-human beings. It's time to be more humble about this staggering probability and more curious about the possibilities it reveals. So that's my piece, and I'll leave it in silence. Thank you for listening. Hit me up and tell me what you thought. Bye.